Welcome to our latest edition of Wellbeing Wednesday. Here we are, Suicide Prevention Month. I could not think of a better person to have as our guest today than Kevin Hines. Some of you may have seen him at NatCon in St. Louis. He always blows the doors off the room. People love him. Kevin, so great to see you.
Chuck, it's even greater to see you, and so glad to be invited to Wellbeing Wednesdays. This is a dream come true.
Oh my gosh. Well, Kevin, you're such a source of inspiration for folks. You really get them thinking. And there's a great story from NatCon that you told me, and I also heard from our staff, that at the book signing, we were so fortunate to run out of every copy of your book that we had available. And there were still people in line. So you were going in your backpack and pulling out books and giving them to people. That's just the kind of guy you are, isn't it?
I think I had 4 of my children's books, or 5, and then like 6 of my Art of Being Broken books. And I just thought, we got potentially 10, 11 people left in line. They got to get books.
That's really generous of you. And I just know also from personal experience how much you care about this work. And it's so great to have you here. And listen, you just mentioned that you have a children's book, right? It's called The Dimly Lit Star. So Tell me a little bit, like what brought you to want to do this book?
Okay, Chuck, I have not told this story yet publicly. So I'm really glad you're hearing it first. So Margaret and I had my lovely wife, Margaret, who you know, and I had just moved to Alpharetta, Georgia 9 years ago. And I'm in the bathroom shaving, and I'm shaving, I had a goatee. I was shaving that to be gone. And I looked over to my right, and on the door was a stain from Margaret's hair dye. When women dye their hair, it's a like that. You can't get that stuff off of anything. And so it had stained the door, but it was in the shape of a very rounded half of a star. And I saw it, and in about 30 seconds, the entire book flooded my mind. And so I literally sat there writing in my iPhone notes, The Dimly Lit Star, because the title came to me, the idea came to me, and the entirety of the book came to me. It changed very, very lightly over time, but what happened after that was incredible, Chuck. The Dimly Lit Star is the story of a mama star and little shines, who are basically myself and my mom when I was a kid, being bullied in grade school to no end because I didn't look like the other kids. I was part black. And I got bullied to no end because of that. They tormented me. And this is about how a mother star comes in and builds resilience in her little shines to get him to understand that just because other people say things about you doesn't mean that you have to take that personally and internalize all of it and let it ruin your day or ruin your life. It's an incredible book, but even more so than that, something more incredible that happened. I was looking for someone to illustrate the book for a very long time, and I couldn't find the right person. And I went to Pahrump, Nevada, to present in front of a high school audience and afterwards a family audience. And they came together, and a young lady, 16-year-old young girl, comes in with a walker in a beautiful red dress, and she was all dolled up. And I was like, what is this girl coming to a high school presentation with dressed up? Well, she had a copy of Cracked Not Broken, my first book. And she sat there after the speech, said, will you sign this? This book saved my life.
Wow.
And then find that happened. And then I got a message from her on Instagram with a comic book version of me. And I looked at it and I was like, that's an incredible illustration. I got on Instagram, I got the information. I called her. I said, would you want to illustrate The Dimly Lit Star? She said yes. And it is one of the most beautifully illustrated books I've ever seen. It's incredible. And it just tells this journey through space. So we go all through space, from the Big Dipper to Saturn with rocket ships, and we talk about how to resist and overcome bullying when you're a child, and it's really powerful.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And listen, I know it's a children's book, but it sounds like some adults too could use the advice of not to take personally things that other people say about them and not to internalize that. And Kevin, that book's available both on Amazon and on your website, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Not that we're doing a shameless plug or anything. This book.
No, it's important. We want children's institutes, we want children's hospitals, we want children's groups all across the country to take this book and utilize it in their offices and help change the minds of young kids who see things in ways that are kind of, as they say, through a difficult and painful lens, and get them out of that lens.
Well, listen, and that's such an important message, especially now during National Suicide Prevention Month. because we know that still too many young people are dying from suicide. I'm always struck by the statistic that of all of the major causes of death in the United States, the only one that has not decreased is suicide. And just, it breaks my heart. I'm sure it breaks your heart. What are you thinking about, these days as you're talking about suicide prevention? What are some of your reflections on kind of where we are as a country?
I see some of the work some folks are doing is really impactful in changing lives and even helping to save lives. And certainly my work's been a part of that. I've been grateful to be a piece of the puzzle, a cog in the wheel. But what breaks my heart, as a part Black man, seeing more 5 to 9-year-old Black kids dying by suicide than ever before in the history of the globe. And that makes my heart break. How does a 5-year-old know how to do this? And really the answer is in part due to some of the media they're seeing, but it also has to do with neglect and abuse at home. And that goes across all the gamut of all races and ethnic backgrounds and makeups, not just Black kids. But when I travel to grade schools, high schools, and even colleges, and I share my story of hope, healing, and recovery around the world, in those schools, the most common things I hear, number one, is that I come to school and people are trying to help me. I go home and I'm being abused and neglected. And the second thing I hear the most of from these youth, from these kids, from children, is that they go to school and they're tended to, but they go home and their parents don't believe brain and mental health issues are real. So they're being completely invalidated. Their pain is being completely invalidated by the very people sworn and supposed to protect them. And that is heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. And I think that we have an opportunity here, rather than lay the blame on people and parents, is to say, parents, if your child comes to you and says that they're being hurt by someone else, take it seriously, understand it, don't judge yourself because of it, don't judge them because of it. Get them the help they desire and deserve for their pain. And if your child comes home and says they think they may have this or that diagnosis of a mental health crisis or struggle, believe them and believe that those conditions are real, that they need to be treated, and then they desperately need help to get to a better place around the corner.
Yeah. That's really startling to hear about both how young people are engaging in suicide, and also about some of the messages from youth. How much time do you spend in high schools, and what are you hearing there in high schools?
I would say I spend anywhere between 30 to 40% of my speaking engagements at high schools. A great percentage also goes to military veterans and law enforcement. But for the groups of high schools I go to, it's very similar. See, Chuck, pain is universal. Pain is universal. If you are alive, you will experience pain, emotional, mental, physical, otherwise. And that's the one thing that ties us all together, is that we can all experience pain of different kinds, but how do we find ways to survive that pain once we experience it? And what if we're in the realm of these high school kids that are experiencing pain on a daily basis every time they go home? That's a tall order to ask them to fight through that for the rest of their adolescence until they get out of that home. But it's not impossible. You have to work on, and some people disagree with this. Some people say it's not possible. I know that resilience can be built over time to be fortified so that your internal shell of hope can not be destroyed. So, I've been through a lot in my life, Chuck. You know this. You know that in my infancy, I was neglected. I was in and out of foster care. I was a very sick infant. The very beginning of my life was very, very tumultuous. But then Pat and Debbie Hines came in, saved my life, made me their son, and gave me the world. And I got very, very lucky when they did that. And growing up in that household of childhood to adolescence, it was in a pretty good place. But my brain caught up with me at 17, and I had a complete mental breakdown, which then led me to leap off the Golden Gate Bridge to try to take my life at 19. But as I came from that leap into hope, I found a resilience inside that has never been diminished since then. And for 24 years of doing this work in suicide prevention since my attempt, I have never attempted again, even while living with chronic thoughts of suicide. And people always ask me, well, Kevin, how do you do that? How do you stay alive when these thoughts flood your mind? And they're like, they're insidious and they play in a loop in my head. how do you defeat them every time? And it's actually a simple two-pronged technique, Chuck. And I'm going to share it with you, and I want you to share it with your listeners and viewers, because this is what anyone can do to survive suicidal ideation anytime. And this is perfect for Suicide Prevention Month. So the first thing I do every time I become suicidal is I find a mirror, anywhere, and I say out loud, my thoughts do not have to become my actions. They can simply be my thoughts. They don't have to own, rule, or define whatever I do next. Thus, I never have to attempt or die in the first place. And the second thing I do, Chuck, and the single most important thing, is I turn to anyone willing to listen, usually my wife or my father, and I say 4 simple but very effective words. I need help now. The big difference between me and people who attempt and die by suicide is that I do not stop saying I need help now until one person is willing to answer the call. And that's how I've survived for 24 years with these thoughts that flood my mind, is that they will never defeat me. They will never take me. I will never die in my hands, because I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to sit in the face of that ideation and say, I'm not listening. You're not going to do this to me. You almost have to separate yourself from the thought. Like, I am Kevin Hines. I am not a suicidal crisis. If you meld the two, you can't see the difference between them. But if you separate them, you separate the thought from the person, you can always defeat it.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for passing along that strategy. It's really interesting, that combination of being very clear in your articulation that you're not going to let suicide defeat you, and your willingness to ask for help. Not just your willingness, but it sounds like your determination, right, to get help in those moments. And you've taken that last 24 years and turned your pain into a lot of hope for other people. And I love that you're trying to help people think about resiliency. I think it's true, right, that we can become resilient. I know you talk a lot about living in a mentally well way. Are there other things that you do, or other practices that you engage in, Kevin, in this journey?
Let me count the ways. I have to have other ways, because this is something I live with on a daily basis. Just 2 days ago, and then about a week before that, I was in a real depression. I was in a funk, and I was down, and I was in a dark spot. But of course, I asked for help, and I got it. And the other things I do are things like I exercise 3 to 5 times a week, 23 minutes every time, because that leads to 12 hours of better mood. If you're physically capable, get to the ground and get to work if you can. I eat anti-inflammatory foods most meals, most days, because we can all debate what healthy and unhealthy eating is, Chuck, or we could just lay the science on the table and say that there are 2 real types of food: inflammatory and anti-inflammatory foods. Inflammatory foods attack your gut and your microbiome, and which houses and creates all your body's dopamine and serotonin, affecting your mental well-being. And if you're feeding yourself only processed poisonous foods, you're damaging your brain's functionality at the cellular level. The converse is true. If you're eating mostly anti-inflammatory meals that feed your gut proper nutrition and your brain, you're enhancing your brain's functionality at the cellular level. So it's fascinating to see the gut-brain health connection, and how important it is to understand that if we eat things that feed that give nutrition to our brains, we will be better mentally. It's the very same reason in food deserts across this country that we have such a high rate of violence, self-violence, violence against others, and mood disorders, where people can only avail of certain kinds of foods because of their pocketbooks, because of food stamps, and because of food deserts, which needs to be adjusted in this country once and for all, Chuck. And so you have to realize the role that what you consume plays in your brain health.
Well, that's great. And I think very practical advice. I'm sorry, Kevin, that cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so exercise, anti-inflammatory meals, education is so important. So we cannot defeat a disease or diagnosis if we don't educate ourselves on the tools, tricks, tips, and techniques to stabilize from that struggle. So if we don't read every bit of information out about these topics, how can we overcome them? So what I did, and I have to give a shout out to my late great uncle, Kevin Joseph Ryan, who I'm named after, He was the patriarch of the family before he passed of pancreatic cancer. Kevin Joseph Ryan was the kind of guy that if you had an issue that you were trying to tackle, he would go in the trunk of his car, he would open it up, and he would pull out a book that would tackle that issue and say, here, this one's for you. Or he might even have 3 books on your topic that you needed to talk about. Well, he would come to every one of my psych ward stays. He was the only person in my family to come to every psych ward stay every day without fail until he died. And he would come, and then when he died, he made sure his brother, Jerry, would come every day. And so Uncle Kevin would bring me 3 things in the psych wards that I was in. He would bring me a cup of soup from the best soup shop in San Francisco. He would bring me conversation that was non-judgmental, that was very compassionate and very kind. And he would give me comic books because I'm a big comic book lover and I've collected for 30 years. Uncle Kevin would bring all of that every day, along with showing up for me. And when he did that, he also brought books. He brought me books on bipolar depression. And so I would read books like Bipolar for Dummies, Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder by Julie Fast. I would read all these books on the topic. And when I got out of the hospital, I knew more tools and techniques to implement into my daily routine to battle this disease. And it was incredible. And even though I'd be in more psych wards after that, I would always revert back to that routine to stabilize.
Well, Kevin, you mentioned that, you've used the last 24 years to educate and to engage people. I know a lot has changed over the last 24 years. How is the way you've engaged, the message? I mean, has that changed at all over the last 24 years? And what are some of the things that are happening today that are kind of different?
Absolutely. Well, it really has changed with the advent of social media. Back when I first started, Chuck, speaking publicly, I'll never forget it, Chuck. I had an opportunity. I was going to church with my dad. It was 7 months after my attempt. I had a back brace on over my clothes, and I was walking with a cane. And I'm still physically healing from the 10.5-hour back surgery to replace my shattered vertebrae with titanium. And my dad's kind of helping me up the stairs gradually. And we go into church, and the priest was talking right to me the entire service. It was like my dad went and was like, hey, say this to my son, and which is entirely possible. He was on their board, so I don't know. But the priest comes out afterwards, Father Michael Harriman, who would marry Margaret and I later, and who confirmed me as a kid. And he comes out and says, Kevin, how would you like to come and talk to our 7th and 8th grade class about your experience this Good Friday? I said, Father, I don't have a speech, and I wouldn't know what to say. And my dad shoved me forward and goes, he'll do it. I was like, what are you doing, Dad? He goes, he'll do it. We need closure. And I'm like, you need closure, old man. I need to go home and lay down. But I didn't say that. He's 6'1" and I'm not. But I went on Good Friday with a speech I wrote until 3 a.m. that day, which is not mentally healthy. And my dad edited it that morning at 8 a.m. We were at the rectory by 9. And here in front of me are 127th and 8th grade kids sitting cross-legged on the floor in their Catholic uniforms I used to wear. My back brace is leaning on a lip on the table so I can't fall, and my cane is in my right arm. So I'm really like stable. And I have a 17-page speech that I haven't memorized, and I'm reading it page by page, dropping page by page to the floor while crying hysterically and shaking because it's so raw, so real. I'd never done it before. And the words coming out of my mouth were so foreign to me, I didn't feel they would have an impact. I thought, what a waste of time. What a waste of their time. Well, I dropped the last page to the floor. I wiped the tears from my eyes. I tried to stop shaking, and 8 hands immediately went up. And I was like, did I make an impact? And I asked the first kid for his question, and he asked the most inappropriate question you could ask in a Catholic school. And the nun was like, don't answer that. And I was like, I wasn't going to. But then 7 more intuitive, empowering, important, very moving questions. And I knew I'd made an impact. And then, Chuck, I got 120 letters from 120 kids.
Wow.
They were mandated to write the letters. It wasn't like they all got together and were like, let's all write to the suicidal guy. But they were given no parameters on what they could write. They were told to write to their heart's content. And 6 of those kids wrote of their active suicidal crisis, and they're alive today, and 2 of them are therapists. Now, that led me on a path to presenting everywhere I could, everywhere anyone would listen. And I literally, Chuck, back in the day before social media, I would cut cards out of a 8x11 paper myself. They would be crooked, and I'd hand them out at schools that I would travel to on the Muni bus in San Francisco. I'd travel from school to school to school. I'd spend all my money on bus fare to get there. I would hand them to the principal and pray that they would have me come speak. But for 6 of those first years, Chuck, I never charged a dime for my speeches. All about building a reputation and building a network and getting people together to understand that storytelling does save lives and that it can. And with the advent of social media, that got a lot easier. And now I don't just share messages when I publicly speak, just like everybody in the world is now a content creator online. I was at the very start of social media before a lot of folks got into it. And it allowed me the opportunity on some viral platforms to reach hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. And I can tell you quite candidly, and I'm happy to tell you this, that my videos, both on my personal channels and across platforms around the world, have reached over 3 billion people.
That's great.
Over 3 billion times. And 200,000 plus people have said this story saved their life.
Wow.
I don't own that. I'm a conduit. I give a message. People go home. They do the work. They ask for help for the first time ever, and they're saving and changing their own lives.
Well, what a great story, Kevin. I love how this came about. This wasn't something that you were dreaming of, right? It was kind of this confluence of events in your family and your dad really pushing you to heal. And it sounds like what keeps you going, right, is the fact that you're still touching people, that people are still resonating with your message. Is that right? I'm guessing that's what keeps you going every day.
Doug, it's incredible the letters that come in and tell me exactly how, in great detail, from some of the most eloquent people on the planet who share what this story in their mind has done to their survival. And that's a gift. You can't make that up. You can't write it. It's a gift, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm gonna keep doing this work, Chuck, until I can no longer walk or talk.
And Kevin, listen, I know from personal experience how committed you are to this, that you've helped me out when I've had family members who needed it, and I just want to thank you for that.
Of course, brother.
So, listen, do you have another book in you? I mean, what's coming next? I mean, you always got something planned. What's on the horizon?
Let's talk about it. So between the end of last year and then the beginning of this year, both The Art of Being Broken, How Storytelling Saves Lives came out. My second memoir, which included kind of a compilation of other stories from people who had walked similar paths and survived terrible traumas, overcome them to the best of their ability, and now are going out to help other people. And those individuals are incredible, and their stories are incredible. Those are featured in the book. I did the audio book for that myself, so check that out. That's on my website. And then the Dimly Lit Star came out in May, and that's been out for a bit, and that's helping kids. And now I'm writing the third installment of the Broken series. So there's Cracked Not Broken, The Art of Being Broken, and the final book in the series of the trilogy will be called Unbroken. And it's about distancing yourself or removing yourself from the label of suffering or victimhood. And it's very important because there are so many people around the world that attach themselves, like I used to the label of suffering and this victim mentality. And if you do that, I'm sorry, but if you do that, that's all you'll ever be. If you believe you are a sufferer, and you are suffering, even if you have suffered, even if you have been victimized, that is all you will ever be. Conversely, if you take the times that you struggled, turn them into your most powerful moment of purpose, then you are no sufferer and you are no victim. You are thriving despite of your pain. And this book explores in basically 28 chapters, ideals and thought processes or your perception from victimhood and from suffering to survival and thriving beyond survival.
Well, I can't wait to read that one when it comes out. It sounds very practical, and I love that. So, Kevin, we've had some time together. Like, what haven't I asked you? What do you think? What do you think people should know who are listening?
Well, I have to tell you all what I'm really excited about, and I debuted this at NatCon this year, the trailer for our film, The Net. This is a project I've been working on since 2014. So many things stalemated and pushed it down to the side, but it's back in full force. We are making the film The Net about the harrowing 90-year effort to end death at the Golden Gate Bridge, the 7 efforts that went before this that failed, and the current effort that has succeeded in great part due to all the people from the Bridge Rail Foundation, founded by my father, Patrick Hines, Paul Muller, and Dave Hall. Dave Hall lost his 13-year-old daughter, Kathy, to the Golden Gate Bridge. On the board there of the Bridge Rail Foundation sits Dana Whitmer, who lost her son Matthew to the bridge. Kimberly Renee and Manuel Gamboa lost their son Kyle to the bridge, and they were fought valiantly every month to stop suicides at the Golden Gate Bridge. So many people involved, so many people, too many to name. And we're making this film chronicling their journey to raise the net and stop suicides there. And I'm happy to tell you that for the last 8 months, suicides attempts off the Golden Gate Bridge have reduced by 83%. And there was, in the last 8 months, a 3-month period for the first time in 90 years where there was 0 suicides at the Golden Gate Bridge.
That's incredible.
We know, Chuck, that reduction of access to lethal means saves lives from suicide. And if you give people hope in the spite of their pain, if you give them hope and time to think about their choices, and you give them other opportunities and other options besides suicide, that they use the will to fight to live. And it's incredible. It's beautiful. And we have an opportunity to use this film as a call to action to raise nets, railings, and barriers across tall buildings, structures, railways, and bridges all over the world.
Yeah. Well, I've thought about you recently when I drove over the Golden Gate Bridge, and I thought about that incredible journey that so many people have been on to create that net and the positive effect that it's happening. And we can't wait to continue to highlight this film, both at NatCon and in other ways.
Thank you.
So, Kevin, wow, always so wonderful to be able to spend time with you, to hear your messages of hope and resiliency, and to really have concrete ideas to help people turn their pain into to manage it and to find ways to keep on living. Any final words, Kevin, as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I like to talk directly to people in the brain and mental health field and behavioral health field, the folks at NatCon, the folks that come every year. I like to talk directly to you. Some of you are in brain pain. Some of you are really struggling and you fear talking out about it because you're in the field. My only request of you is that you don't silence your pain anymore. Your pain is worthy. Your pain is valid. Your pain is important, and your pain matters because you do. So release that pain by telling someone you love what you're going through, because you don't have to go it alone. And you got a whole field of people and a whole support network of NatCon that love you, and National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Keep going. Be here tomorrow. Never stop. And always, always ask for help. And if the first person you ask doesn't give it to you, keep asking until you get it.
Kevin, you're wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, everyone who tuned in to this edition of Wellbeing Wednesday. I hope you had as much fun as I did having this conversation with the incredible, hopeful, inspirational Kevin Hines. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.